Now, Shabbatai Zevi, he basically crowned himself as the king of this Zevite movement. And in 1666 he moved from Izmir in Turkey to the Netherlands, and he gathered together an enormous international following amongst the Jewish communities of Spain, the Jewish communities of Germany, the Ashkenazis. Many Jewish people actually followed Shabbatai Zevi. When he returned back from his travels and he'd gathered together 100,000, 150,000 followers, and he'd been preaching incest, he'd been preaching brothers marrying and having sex with children, he'd been preaching all of this what we call satanic kind of theology. Do as thou wilt, do what you want, kill someone if you want, lie, cheat, steal. Then taken over by a guy called Nathan of Gaza, and then after Nathan of Gaza the movement was taken over by a guy called Jacob Frank. Now Jacob Frank was exactly the same as Shabbatai Zevi. He was from a Hebrew family, but he didn't convert to Islam, he converted to Catholicism. And what we see today is we see vast trafficking of babies and children. Many of them go missing, street children, in all of these countries which are controlled by the Vatican. This is a very important point. And that meant that from that era onwards, which is about the late 1770s, the followers of Jacob Frank, and he had 100, 150, 200,000 followers. As I said, he had a private army of 26,000 people, and they were all Judeo-Zevite Satanists. And what has happened is that we now have our present day situation, which is really serious.
Can you tell me the worst thing that has happened that caused the tipping point in your situation?
Well, that was the beginning of the end. You get so deep into these circles. And you sign a lifetime contract, not with blood or anything, to never disclose names of companies, organizations or people. I think that is why I am still alive. You have to stick to it. If we are talking about the worst things that I have experienced, I just told you about things that made the freezer glitch. My conscience started to show itself. Let's put it this way. I was training to become a psychopath and I failed. I did not complete the training and didn't become a psychopath. My conscience came back, and the most difficult part for me was, because I had such a great status there, I was a success. I was trusted with the people playing at this level.
Mensen in deze wereld die dus op dat niveau speelden.
To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale, God doesn't exist. None of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer. And I also was in contact with those circles, only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So, I went to places called churches of Satan.
So now we are talking about Satanism.
Yes. So, I visited these churches, just as a visitor, dropped by. And then they were doing their holy mass with naked women and liquor and stuff. And it just amused me. I didn't believe in any of this stuff, and was far from convinced if any of this was real.
It was just a spectacle to you.
Yes. In my opinion, the darkness and evil is within the people themselves. I didn't make the connection yet. So I was a guest in those circles, and it amused me greatly to see all those named women and the other things. It was the good life. But then at some point, I was invited, which is why I'm telling you all this, to participate in sacrifices abroad. That was the breaking point. Children.
You were asked to do that?
Yes. And I couldn't do that.
Would you like to stop for a moment, by the way?
No. And then I started to slowly break down. I lived through quite a lot as a child myself, and this really touched me deeply. Everything changed. But that is the world I found myself in. And then I started to refuse assignments within my job. I could no longer do it, which made me a threat. I was no longer capable of functioning optimally. My performance started to shake and I had refused tasks. I had not participated. The purpose of the whole thing, eventually, in that world, is that they have everybody in their pocket. You need to be susceptible to blackmail. And blackmailing me proved to be very hard if I look back on it. They wanted to do that through those children. And that broke me.
Is that, you are not telling me something new, what they also do in politics?
If you Google this, you'll find enough worldwide witness accounts to know this isn't a Walt Disney fairy tale. Unfortunately, the truth is that worldwide they have been doing this for thousands of years.
Could you tell us something specific about that? How did that happen? Because you were invited.
I started to refuse assignments. My conscience came back after the request involving the children, and I started to refuse more and more. I had a conscience and I couldn't function anymore.
But you did still show up at work after that?
I didn't really have a choice. I had my own business with several offices and employees. Everything was still rolling.
It must have been hard.
Yes, it got very hard, all the tensions. So, on the one hand you are playing with money on a high level, in which you can't afford to make mistakes. Otherwise everything falls down at once. Your entire business is ruined, everybody involved, including yourself. Then you are really screwed. So that brings a lot of stress, factoring in the resurfacing of a conscience. I was warned off when I got into this. Don't do it if you can't put your conscience at minus 100 degrees in the freezer.
And you probably realized that then?
Yes, I heard myself laugh at it back then, but it wasn't a joke at all. I totally did not understand where I really got into.
And your proverbial freezer was switched off?
Broken. I couldn't do it anymore. So, I tried to work through it, keep up appearances. I didn't know how to get out of this. I was trapped as well. Everybody was trapped. This all led me to crash completely eventually. My body just simply stopped. The first thing I saw was my mother crying at the intensive care.
You ended up at the IC?
Yeah, I really shut down.
You had literally crashed?
I have seen them working on me. And later on, I've been reluctant to talk about it for a long time. I really talked about it much later. So, I lived through all of that, but I also needed a long time to recover.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I was a train wreck. Complete wreck. I was completely burned out. I had crashed and the body needed a year to recover. because I don't really want to get into it now, but in those circles, I got tortured physically during my exit time. This was in order to make sure I would never break the contract of secrecy. So, I was taken for a certain amount of time. I was treated. All those factors together just increased the stress I was experiencing. Literally running full speed towards my own end.
Do you mean abductions, as well call it, or programming?
No. They exposed me to certain types of torture. That makes sure you'll never damage anyone in that world.
Ronald, you were previously mentioning the pyramid. I was talking about the top of this pyramid, 8,500 people. Could you tell us about how things operate up there nowadays?
Yes, certainly. These 8,500 people make use of a monetary system, a financial monetary system, which we refer to as money and banks, used in our daily lives. So, the mechanism they use is indeed a system in the shape of a pyramid. So you have the top of 8,000 to 8,500 people, then the layer under them. They have created an institution in 1930. This was done from the Netherlands called the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, with headquarters situated in Switzerland. They are the headquarters of the banks and of the financial system. The top 8,500 people gives orders to BIS in Basel, from which it propagates downward through the system to be executed. We know Basel from the Basel agreements. It went on with the banks, and then we got Basel I, Basel II, Basel III. Some people have heard of the agreements or read about them in the newspaper. That's all about the BIS. So, as I just said, this came into existence in 1930, originating from the Netherlands. And already in 1931 was BIS recognized worldwide by basically all countries to be the headquarters of the financial world. Every central bank is a member of this BIS club. Which is a civil organization, not a governmental one, who have a headquarters agreement that describes in total what the BIS stands for. Its range of power, authorization level, operations and output. When you are reading in these documents what they stand for, they are available on their website. You see how they have incorporated all these rules, recognized worldwide, claiming their independency from Switzerland. The grounds their headquarters are on are independent from the country. It also states their immunity. It also states they are above all worldly rules. Nobody can touch them. They have complete immunity. So, they have a complete immunity from everything on earth. Furthermore, they have their own police service, so you can't just go in yelling, "You bastards," or something of the sort, because you won't get away with it. To be concise, it's a fully recognized, immune state, beyond the grasp of any rules, inviolable. This institute was also the location during World War I and before, in which the so-called enemies, the Nazis and their allies met up, in which they traded gold raided from Jewish people of states or other people. BIS is a club in which they are all friends. And these headquarters maintain the monetary system as it is and assures the amount of currency. At the so-called bottom of the pyramid, where all value is located at the bottom means real life there where people live, where the earth is, nature. And the real value at the bottom of the pyramid is being extorted. They do this by using the financial system. Under the central bank, the BIS, we find the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. People can read about this in the newspapers, and the World Bank. These two institutes often help countries when needed. What they really do is create debt in these countries in such a way that they will never be able to pay it off. They actually calculate the amount needed in order to ensure this fact, enabling them to increase the grip they have on a country or continent such as Africa, which is rich in resources, very rich. Through their connections with friends, multinationals, they can extort the value from the countries by allowing them to pay in kind, resources for the debt they'll never be able to resolve.
So, they pay with labor, slave labor you could say, I suppose.
Yes, and the only requirement is buying off the top within such a country. Blackmail them with children, or severance pay. You name it. You buy them off and then you own them. So, this was the first layer under BIS, the World Bank and IMF. The next layer would be the central banks. Again, all civil organizations, independent from governmental organizations, amongst which, nowadays, we have the Central Bank of Europe. We used to also have the national banks in this layer, but they have been demoted to being side offices of the Central Bank of Europe.
Where do we find the city in this story?
You mean the city of London? This is also a free state.
As in Vatican City?
Yes, Vatican City. There is also such a place in Washington. There are many free states in the world at the same level, like the BIS in Basel. Vatican Bank in Vatican City is an example of such a free state. When we take the City of London, and we can speak of one of the biggest financial cores of the world, which for example determines the gold rate. They manipulate the gold rate on a daily basis, so they are able to fill people with money or empty them altogether. This makes London City a core player in the financial world. They are a very important mechanism in the bigger scheme, when we are talking about the pyramid, because we were talking about the structure of the BIS in Basel. Then IMF and World Bank, then the central banks like the Federal Reserve in America and others. Then the regular banks, but also stock market centers. We are now talking about these free states with immunity from everyone. Free states where nothing and no one can do anything against this, included the people working for these institutes. They also got immunity.
Are they on the same level as BIS?
No, BIS delegates the execution of instructions to the others, the headquarter of the headquarters. And from out of BIS all instructions are entered and set to all the layers below.
Alright, so also to the city.
Yes, indeed. They are all instructed from the top. So, to pick up from the regular banks we just mentioned, under them we find the multinationals, and then below we find the governments. And finally under them we find ourselves, the people.